Some people might say that a bat crashing through a window is a bad omen.
Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is the most disappointing TV show of the last decade. I wasn't even sure that I wanted to make a video about this show. I hesitated for a while, because there's a lot to say about it, but I didn't feel like frustrating myself, and I wasn't entirely certain that I would be willing to go back and rewatch the show to finish it. Because yeah, initially I stopped watching the show in season 3, but torturing myself is part of the job, so I opened up Netflix and watched the whole thing from episode 1. And now, here I am, slightly more bitter than usual. And that's not to say that Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is an awful show with no redeeming qualities. No, that would be a lie. On the contrary, the show has its moments, but that's exactly why it's so disappointing. You'll get what I mean a little later. Now hear me out, hear me out. I know this is gonna be one hell of a bold statement, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I genuinely believe the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina could have been one of the greatest television series of all time. Bold statement, I know, I warned you, you can't yell at me. And I stand by that statement. But unfortunately for us, the show was completely botched and we were left with whatever this ended up being. I had high hopes for this show, not only because I grew up watching Sabrina the Teenage Witch with Melissa Joan Hart, the show from the 90s, but also because I quite enjoyed the comic book this version of the character is based on. So I guess the first question would be, what is Chilling Adventures of Sabrina? That's a good place to start. For the uninitiated, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, or Chaos as fans call it, is the second entry in the so-called Archieverse, a connected universe of television shows based on the characters of Archie comics that was started in 2017 by the CW's Riverdale. You're next, motherfucker. Sleep while you still can. The Archieverse was created by this man. This man is Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa, the showrunner of Riverdale. Roberto is the worst for many, many reasons, some of which I will touch on in this video, and others I will touch on in my Riverdale video. He is one of the worst showrunners in Hollywood history, and that's mainly because Roberto used to write comic books, and he notably created Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Not just the show, but the comic book the show is based on. Yeah, you get the irony, right? This man made a terrible adaptation of his own comic book. And the reason why is because Roberto seems to think he can write television the same way he writes comic books. And that doesn't work. And if anything, he proved that it doesn't work. Because despite having been hyped up quite a lot by the people behind it, I think it's fair to mention that so far, the Archieverse has been nothing short of an absolute failure. If you don't know, the universe has 3 shows. Riverdale, which will not be around for much longer, but that's a conversation for another video. Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which was cancelled after 4 seasons, and the CW's Katie Keene, which was cancelled after 1 season that absolutely nobody watched.
We did not get picked up for a second season.
That means that 2/3 of the Archieverse is already dead in the water, and it just started. Because yeah, another interesting thing to point out is that Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is a show that actually died surprisingly young. The show had 4 seasons, yes, this might seem like a lot, but don't let that fool you. The show was only around for 2 years between 2018 and 2020. That's because season 2 came out only 6 months after season 1, and season 3 came out a mere 9 months after season 2. It's a pretty fast turnaround for a show of that scale, especially for Netflix, which has a number of projects that have taken 2 years to release new seasons, as we've seen with shows like Stranger Things, The OA, Dark, or House of Cards. But while the Archieverse has been a deplorable mess, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina stands out because it's the only show in the Archieverse to be a Netflix original, with the other 2 shows being at the CW. And that difference alone was one of the major reasons why the show had so much potential. But to further understand why Chilling Adventures of Sabrina crashed and burned, we have to dive into the story itself. And before we do that, I just want to take a quick moment to thank today's sponsor, Adam and Eve. Yeah guys, they're back. Adam and Eve are sponsoring this video. And who better to sponsor a video about a show that deals with sex demons than the #1 online adult store, Adam and Eve. Wait, did that make sense? Yeah, it makes sense. Now if you don't know, the year 2021 marks the 50th anniversary of Adam and Eve. And right now, if you go to adamandeve.com and use code SPACE, case, you'll get 50% off of one item, and also, if you're in the US or Canada, you'll get free shipping. And hey, if you do end up getting yourself some stuff, you'll be contributing to a great cause, because 20% of their profit goes to fight the spread of HIV around the world. So thank you Adam and Eve for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to the show. So Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is the story of Sabrina Spellman, a 15-year-old magical being who lives in the town of Greendale. Sabrina is half witch on her father's side, and half mortal on her mother's side. She has always enjoyed her life as both a witch and a mortal, but on her 16th birthday, she will be forced to make a choice as a part of this ritual called a dark baptism. Her choice is simple. She can either become fully mortal and let go of the magical world along with her entire family, or become a full witch and leave the mortal world along with her boyfriend and her best friends, meaning she will also have to sign her name in the devil's book and pledge eternal allegiance to him. Her birthday is approaching fast, she doesn't know what to do, but things begin to take a darker turn when a mysterious woman arrives in town and steals the identity of Sabrina's teacher. Now that is a very simple, but very solid premise. This might sound a bit odd, but Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is one of the shows I was the most excited for in my entire life. I'm not kidding here, I seriously lost my mind when it was announced. Because the promise of a dark retelling of the Greendale Witch rooted in the horror genre was genuinely fascinating, and I was hooked. I really enjoyed the horror, dark, and gritty aspects of the comic book. I mean, I knew there were some things they just would not be able to adapt in here. Like Betty Cooper and Veronica Lodge are both in the comic book, and they're witches. I think Jughead appears also at some point. Like, they clearly weren't gonna do that here, but there was a lot to play with to give us great horror with this show. I didn't really know what to expect, but I couldn't wait to see what it was going to look like. And in September 2018, after one long year of anticipation, the very first teaser for the show came out, and it surpassed all of my expectations.
Happy birthday to you.
This teaser was so good, I thought I was gonna die. And to this day, I still think it's one of the best teasers Netflix has ever released. It's just so badass. It's dark and mysterious, it looks fantastic, it's creepy, everything about it just spoke to me. It was my vibe, and I was hooked. I fell for it. They had me. My excitement for this show was through the roof. It looked like a mature take on the character and the story. It looked like it was really leaning into the horror aspect. I was 100% on board. This show could not come fast enough. I was hyped beyond words. And that is where I made my big mistake. You see, I got so excited about that creepy-ass teaser that I made the very conscious decision to not watch any other piece of promotional material before the release. And that's my bad, I shouldn't have done that. I was just too impressed with it, so I wanted to go into the show with as little information as possible. So I did not watch the trailers that followed. That was a mistake, because the following trailers are insanely different in tone from the initial teaser. The first teaser is really sinister and heavy on horror, and it just overall gives this very creepy vibe, and I wrongfully assumed this was the atmosphere the whole show was going for. However, the next trailers are more accurate when it comes to showing the real vibe of the show. It's a bit more ridiculous and quirky and childlike. In fact, it becomes pretty clear that the initial teaser was a misdirect, because the coolest moment from the teaser, the coolest sequence of the entire thing, is never actually in the show. It was shot just for the teaser. So as you can imagine, when Chilling Adventures of Sabrina came out, I was thrown for a loop. It was not at all what I expected, but I didn't hate it. Season 1, while very flawed and full of inconsistencies and plot holes and terrible characterization, is not all bad. Once I adjusted to the show's tone and got into the story, there are parts of it I genuinely enjoy. It was completely ridiculous, and I thought there was a lot of fun to have with this show. The plot is quite simple. Sabrina has to choose between the mortal world and the witch world when she turns 16 years old, but when her birthday arrives, she refuses to choose, and most of the season is essentially her having to deal with the consequences of that. It's not very well executed, and the writers make this very simple concept way too convoluted for its own good, but I also wouldn't say it's bad. There was some solid groundwork there. I was hoping the show would improve after that, but overall, season 1 was okay. Season 2 sees Sabrina facing off against the devil and fight to preserve her free will. It's honestly a pretty good premise. I like that idea. And season 2 is pretty much on par with season 1. They're neck and neck in terms of quality and storytelling. feeling, both the good and the bad. Nothing really improves in it, but it also doesn't get worse. Season 2 is just more of the same, honestly. Some ridiculous, witchy stuff with very dumb stuff that is annoying to get through, and other more entertaining stuff that is somewhat fun to watch. It's still not quite a great show, but it's good enough. Chaos is the type of show you put on when you have nothing else to watch, you know? I mean, yes, I was underwhelmed and disappointed that we didn't get the dark and mature horror reimagining of Sabrina, but I'm not beyond having a guilty pleasure show to binge, so I'll take what I can get. Season 2 is fun for what it is. Now, here's the thing. When it comes to movies and television, and all sorts of media for that matter, I think there is a very fine line between ridiculous and stupid. And let me be very clear, ridiculous can be good. It's fun. It's an element of the story that's needed to achieve a certain tone. Pirates of the Caribbean is ridiculous. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is ridiculous. Kingsman is ridiculous. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is ridiculous. Doctor Who is ridiculous, and that's fine. I'm okay with space wizards fighting with laser swords. It works, it's fun. But sometimes the people behind those entities kinda get carried away and they cross the line that stands between being ridiculous and being stupid. Pirates of the Caribbean crossed that line in movie 4. Kingsman crossed that line after the first movie, and Chilling Adventures of Sabrina crossed that line in Season 3. Season 3 is the point where Chilling Adventures of Sabrina officially becomes a bad show. It's the point where it becomes stupid. And that is where every little spark of enjoyment I could find here and there in the story completely disappeared. It's just not fun anymore. And trust me, it pains me to say that, because on paper, the premise of Season 3 is absolutely bonkers. It's so cool. In Season 3, Sabrina and her friends have to find a way to get into a prison to break out Sabrina's boyfriend Nick, who was put in there at the end of the last season. Simple enough, but here's the catch. That prison is hell. Yes, you heard that right. That's the premise of Season 3. They have to break into hell to get her boyfriend out of it. That is such a cool concept. This was probably the season with the biggest amount of potential out of all of them. It's pretty much impossible to mess up that premise. I mean, you know, unless you're Roberto Feminism, because he completely fucked that up. Because yeah, for a season that had so much potential, Chilling Adventures Season 3 was surprisingly dull. The first 2 seasons had a lot of low points. It was awkward and at times brutally flat, but it was never boring. I was always entertained to some degree. But Season 3 is not only the point where the show becomes bad, it's also where the show becomes boring. And that's from the very first minutes of the first episode. Something immediately feels off about the show, and to this day, I can't quite put my finger on it. But the show just doesn't work anymore. Oh, and of course, Season 3 also sees the show ruined by a very specific curse that plagues every single one of Roberto's projects.
In New York, the people talk and try to make us rhyme. They really hawk, but we just walk because we have no time.
What the hell is that?
Yeah. Roberto really likes to turn his shows into musicals out of nowhere. It's kind of his thing. And it's become a big subject of conversations online because he is notoriously awful at making musicals. And that's not an understatement. He is atrocious at it. His musicals are so hard to watch, it's depressing. And unfortunately, that's what Chilling Adventures Season 3 turns into. But yeah, things really go south after Season 2. The world of the show was already very flawed and incoherent in lots of places, but by Season 3, it's just so completely broken that it's not fun anymore. Nothing makes sense, the characters all become insanely stupid and boring, and nothing matters anymore. Oh, and Season 4 is just sad. It's unwatchable. Fuck Season 4. For starters, I think it's fair to mention that Chilling Adventures is quite literally the definition of style over substance. It's a show that is more interested in looking good than being good, if that makes sense. And hey, aside from the weird warping effect they refuse to stop putting on screen, their show looked decent. There were some really cool shots here and there. Look at this, and this, and this. All of that is great, but I said it before and I'll say it again. It doesn't matter how good your show looks. Bad writing never wins. And even at its best, weak writing is a major problem with the show that is always there. Season 1 was already showing its cracks. For one, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is a show that struggles greatly with pacing. And that's from the very first episode to the very last one. The story never moves in a way that feels natural, and at times, the writers just decide to throw a completely irrelevant irrelevant subplot that feels like they just needed to fill time in this specific episode, and it's just jarring. Episode 3 of season 1 has this random storyline where Sabrina and her friend Roz try to uncover a conspiracy in their high school by trying to prove that their principal is secretly banning inappropriate books from the library. It's really stupid, and the show treats it way too seriously, and it messes with the pacing of the show. I hate that the show spends so much time on Sabrina's mortal friends in season 1 because they're not relevant to the plot until the final episode, and they just keep interrupting the main story. I hate that the final villain of the season is a random new mystical entity that comes out of nowhere. I hate that they build up to him for the entirety of the finale and then they never actually fight him. He literally comes and goes and we never get an explanation because the characters never actually face him. That's just weak writing. I hate that it takes 7 episodes for season 1 to start having a story that is cohesive because they wasted the brilliant premise of the show in the first 2 episodes. I hate that the final shot of the season is Sabrina breaking the 4th wall and literally winking at the camera. It's kinda dumb. The choices in the writing of the show were always kinda flaky, and I do believe that's why the show was doomed. The first couple seasons had room for improvement, but they decided to not improve at all, and so people lost interest. One of the aspects of it that makes it so strange is the tone being all over the place. This show doesn't know what it wants to be. Chilling Adventures of Sabrina often feels like it's written for children, like in the dialogue, the storylines, all of it is really childlike, and I mean like little kids, maybe 8 to 9 years old. But also, the show is way too violent and way too sexual to be made for children. So, who is this show for exactly? Who's the target here? Don't get me wrong, the show had its following, but I do think the tone of the show being so disjointed contributed to people losing interest. You could just feel the hype for Chilling Adventures die as time went on. People talked about it a lot when season 1 came out. Many criticized it but recognized its potential. But after season 2, there just wasn't that big of a discussion around it. I think a lot of people just stopped caring. And I don't blame them. And before some of you start yelling at me in the comments, yes, I understand that Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is camp. I understand that it's intended to be cheesy and quirky and all that good stuff. I'm not stupid, I get it. However, shows can be quirky and campy and still have good writing. It can still be clever and effective and just, you know, good. The Good Place is insanely cheesy and campy and quirky, but it's also one of the best written TV shows of the last few years. And frankly, if you ask me, I am quite tired of people using camp as an excuse to justify bad writing. Your show is not campy, it's just bad, stop it. And with that out of the way, let's get to the characters now. Sabrina Spellman. So like I mentioned earlier, when you meet Sabrina in the show, she is just about to turn 16. I think it's like 3 or 4 days before her birthday, and she's struggling to come to terms with the choice she is being forced to make. She's kind of in denial. She doesn't want to face the fact that she will have to choose between the magic world and the mortal world. But everyone is telling her that she can't have both, that's just how things are. And right off the bat, I will immediately acknowledge that Kiernan Shipka as Sabrina Spellman is the definition of perfect casting. And I mean that in the most literal way possible. She is so great in this role. She was born to play this role. From the first few seconds that she appeared on screen, I was already on board. She immediately makes the character captivating. She immediately makes the character her own. She gives a charisma and an energy to Sabrina that is just absolutely delightful, and she does a fantastic job at balancing the darker sides of the character while also keeping her fun and quirky. Even during the lowest points of the show where Sabrina becomes really hard to like, her performance is always on point. And I firmly believe that even in a distant future, Shipka's portrayal of the character is probably going to be known as the definitive one. And again, that's coming from someone who loved the Melissa Joan Hart version. But there's no contest here when it comes to Kiernan Shipka. There's no discussion to be had. She is Sabrina Spellman. I don't think anyone will argue with me on that. And if they do, well, I'm sorry you're wrong. I'd hate to be in your place. Being wrong sucks. Now, there's a lot, and I mean a lot, to say about Sabrina in this show, so strap in. I think that in the first couple of episodes of the show, it's quite hard to dislike Sabrina. The show presents her as this loving and caring person with a lot of heart and a lot of strength, and at first, you'll believe it, you'll buy into the persona, and with that description in mind, you're going to like a lot of things about her, and I did too. She's very alive and full of joy. She likes putting people in a good mood. She really sees the best out of life, and she's really nice and helpful and positive. I like that she doesn't take shit from anybody, and while she tends to be a little arrogant, she still has a very clear notion of who she is. I really like that when people come to her and are like, hey, you have to surrender to the devil now. She's like, no, fuck the devil and fuck you guys. I will burn everything down if you ever tell me what to do again.
My name is Sabrina Spellman, and I will not sign it away.
Cool. I was just asking for real.
Seriously, she has moments of badassery that are legitimately epic. There's mainly one in episode 6 of season 2, which is probably the best episode of the entire series. There's that incredible scene where Sabrina is killed, and about a minute later, she comes back to life and absolutely bodies a bunch of angels with hellfire.
I am the Dark Lord's sword!
That was metal as shit. But despite all of these things, you inevitably start to realize that a lot of things about Sabrina are very wrong. And despite the fact that Kiernan Shipka is perfect in the role, it becomes a little too obvious that Sabrina is a very flawed character. The first hint comes from that really intriguing scene in the pilot where Sabrina reveals to her boyfriend Harvey that she's a witch, but she completely fucks it up and it doesn't go the way she had planned, so she panics and just erases Harvey's memory with a spell. That scene is the beginning of a very clear theme with her character that carries on through the entire show. And this is where things start to fall apart for her. See, Sabrina doesn't really think about the consequences of her actions, and when those consequences do come, she is not willing to deal with them. She jumps headfirst into trouble without thinking about how her actions will affect others, but then she refuses to take the blame when things go wrong. And that's because Sabrina is a really, really selfish person. She has a bit of a hero complex, and she's one of those annoying people who cannot help but put their noses in other people's business, and she forces her help onto everybody even when they make it very clear that they don't want it. She always thinks she knows better than people, and after a while, if you take away the fact that she looks like Kiernan Shipka, and you actually take a deeper look at her actions and decisions throughout the show, you quickly come to the realization that Sabrina is an insane person. The logic of this character is so out of focus. Her way of thinking is so brutally flawed that it's almost impossible to see her as one of the good guys. She does some of the most disturbing shit that would normally make any character a villain in a heartbeat. In season 1, Harvey's brother Tommy dies, so she decides to sacrifice her classmate and slits her throat in an attempt to resurrect Tommy. And when it goes wrong, because obviously, Sabrina refuses to deal with the consequences and refuses to take responsibility for her actions, leaving her classmate sick and dying without lifting a finger to help, and leaving her boyfriend in a position where he is forced to kill his own brother and lose him all over again in order to fix her mess. And the worst part is that after Harvey is forced to murder his own brother because of her, Sabrina is not upset that he is now going to be traumatized forever. No. Sabrina is upset because Harvey won't forgive her for what she did. She does not at all realize the gravity of her actions. And look, here's the thing. I love flawed characters. Genuinely, I think they're the most interesting characters you can find. I could make a 3-hour video on my favorite characters and why their flaws make them so great as characters. However, it's very important to take into account that flawed characters work when the flaws are intentional on the writer's part. But Sabrina falls into another category. Sabrina is an accidentally flawed character as a result of the writers trying to make her flawless. And the problem with all this is that the show never acknowledges her actions as being wrong, or at least not inherently. Sabrina suffers from a writing problem that I like to call PCS, Perfect Character Syndrome. Perfect Character Syndrome happens when writers refuse to acknowledge that their protagonist has flaws. They want the character to always be the center of attention, to always be right, to always be winning, and always be on top. As a result, the flaws of the character that annoy audiences are not intentional. They're not a part of the character. Instead, they're a direct consequence of the inconsistent writing that is in conflict with how the writers perceive their character. So within the context of Chilling Adventures, Sabrina is a goddess. She is perfect. If she walks into a room, all of the attention is on her, all the boys want her, all the girls are jealous, jealous of her, she's more talented than everyone at everything, she can outsmart anyone with very little effort, the rules don't apply to her, and she never really needs to face consequences for her actions. And when I say the rules don't apply to her, I'm not only talking about school rules or things like that. No. I'm talking about rules that are external to the story itself, specific limitations tied to the show's world. The rules of the mythology don't apply to her. She just completely breaks the consistency of what witches can or cannot do. That's specifically true in the first 2 seasons of the show. If you really take a look at it, all of the early episodes of Chilling Adventures of Sabrina are based on the same idea. Sabrina learns that things around her work a certain way, and she decides that no, things won't work like that anymore because she doesn't feel like it. She's forced to do something she doesn't want to do, and then she decides she won't do it, and that's it. No one really stops her. That, or she's told she cannot do something, so she decides she's going to do it anyways, and then she does, and that's kind of it. The best example of all this is in season 1 when Father Blackwood gives Sabrina this super complicated magical puzzle that's supposedly impossible to solve. It's mentioned that great warlocks have tried to solve it for decades, maybe even centuries. Some have even gone crazy while trying. Father Blackwood himself used all of his hundreds of years of knowledge and power to try and solve the puzzle, but he couldn't do it. One of Sabrina's new classmates tells her that he tried for 3 years, but he couldn't do it. So Sabrina takes the puzzle home, and she solves it that same night in about 1 minute like it's nothing, without any knowledge of what she's actually doing. Same thing in season 3. The season 2 finale ends with Sabrina telling her friend she wants to break into hell and get her boyfriend back. Everyone is talking about how it's impossible to just do that, you can't just enter the devil's kingdom. Many have tried for thousands of years and failed, being subjected to a terrible fate. Hell is just impossible to break into. Well, guess what? Sabrina figures it out in 5 minutes. I'm not kidding, you would think that infiltrating hell would be like this season's arc, but no, they break Nick out of hell in the first episode of season 3, effectively killing all of the tension built by the finale. And it goes like that for most of the show. You're given a rule that grounds the universe in its own sense of reality, and Sabrina immediately breaks that rule. We're told you cannot just defeat a sleep demon. They're too dangerous, and if you fall asleep, you're at their mercy and they're invincible. You can't defeat them. Well, it doesn't matter because Sabrina just does it anyway by the end of the episode. We're told you cannot be both a mortal and a witch. Nature won't allow it. It's never been done before. You have to choose. You cannot have it both ways. You can't do that. Well, it doesn't matter because Sabrina does it anyway. And it turns out that no one can really do anything about it, so she just keeps on doing it. She gets to have it both ways. We're told that witches are not allowed or even able to perform exorcisms of any kind because it's impossible. It requires the power of God instead of the power of Satan. Therefore, it is not something witches are naturally able to do. Well, it doesn't matter because Sabrina does it anyway. Sabrina is invincible. Nothing is an obstacle to her. She's a writing anomaly. The writers do not want her to be bogged down by rules and limitations they establish themselves in the universe, so she just never is. And that's one of the big reasons why this show never really has any tension, because the writers are perfectly willing to break their own rules to make Sabrina win. And because the rules don't apply to her, Sabrina ends up being a character that severely lacks development. She's one of those characters who spend their entire time on their shows making the same mistakes over and over again. She never learns her lesson, she never grows as a person, and she's often validated in her insane behavior because the writers really don't like it when Sabrina is wrong. So even when she is clearly in the wrong in any given situation, she's still not wrong in the eyes of the writers, and that tends to make her quite arrogant, entitled, and at times very unlikable. She's too good for everything, she's too good for everyone, and she treats people accordingly. She puts herself on this moral high ground where she convinces herself that she's the only one with the solutions. She patronizes people constantly, and she thinks she can do whatever the fuck she wants without having to face any consequences. It's never her fault, it's everyone else's.
So you're a thief as well as a murderer?
Murderer?
You killed a witch, didn't you?
Just for a few minutes. This is not a joke.
Have a break. have a Kit Kat.
The show is also very inconsistent when it comes to Sabrina's knowledge of the witch world. It's something that I noticed like halfway through season 1, but Sabrina tends to be completely clueless about things that she should know very well, or sometimes she knows things that she should not know, and that's a massive weakness in the show's writing. For example, in season 1, Sabrina finds out about the Feast of Feasts, a witch tradition that is described as the Witch Thanksgiving, where every year a female member of each family of the Church of Night enters a lottery so they can be chosen as queen by Satan, meaning they will be sacrificed and eaten as the main course of their Thanksgiving dinner. I know, it sounds stupid, and that's because it is. Anyway, Sabrina didn't know about that tradition, and she immediately opposes herself to the practice. But here's where that doesn't add up. The Feast of Feasts is clearly stated to be a yearly tradition. It happens every year. How can Sabrina not know about it? She has always lived with Hilda and Zelda. She's been raised in the world of magic from birth. So there's absolutely no way Sabrina cannot know about a yearly tradition this big. You get what I mean now when I say her knowledge of the world doesn't make sense? That's more of an exposition problem because the writers don't really know how to convey information to the audience without having somebody spelling it out to Sabrina, which makes her knowledge very inconsistent, but it doesn't stop there. Something that you realize pretty quickly is that none of the lore around this show is really set in stone, and it really seems like the writers just make up new things out of nowhere, even if it completely negates things that were previously established. In other words, the show doesn't seem to understand what its own lore is or how it works. Like if you ask the question, who is Sabrina, and you look at the chronology of the show for the answer, you're probably gonna have an aneurysm. Let me show you what I mean. In season 2, the show has its most badass reveal when we learn that Sabrina is the human incarnation of the Devil's Sword, which is why she's so important to Lucifer and why everyone needs her to sign her name in the Book of the Beast. I genuinely thought that was an insanely cool concept. She is the human incarnation of the Devil's Sword. That is so dope. But then it turns out that she's not the Devil's Sword. That's never even brought up again. Instead, she's now the Devil's daughter and has a claim on the throne of hell. But then we find out that Sabrina is also part angel, and then she turns out to be something else known as the Lady of Shadows. And then we discover she's actually something else known as the Herald of Hell. And then someone refers to her as the Lady of Pandemonium. And then she becomes another thing called the Face of Final Shadows, and then she becomes the Queen of Hell.
A number of things have annoyed me this week.
Like, the writers just can't decide what celestial being they want Sabrina to be, but because they need things to constantly escalate, they keep making up new ones, and she's just all of them, I guess? It's very unclear. There's absolutely no consistency to the mythology around Sabrina, and both her status and her origins become a void that means nothing. Oh, and speaking of void, in the series finale, Sabrina becomes yet another celestial being known as the Void, because of course she does. So long story short, Sabrina is a very broken character that is very difficult to like if you take away the fact that Kiernan Shipka is insanely good in the role. She's a terrible protagonist, and the writing of her character never improves throughout the entire show. She never becomes more likable than she is in the first 2 or 3 episodes, which is a shame. Unfortunately, a great actress cannot save a shitty character. It was true for Lucy Hale as Aria Montgomery, or even Katie Keene, and it's true for Kiernan Shipka as Sabrina Spellman. Okay, let's talk about her cool cousin now. Ambrose Spellman. Ambrose is Sabrina's cousin, who lives with her and her aunts at the Spellman house. But the thing with him is that he cannot leave the house. Ambrose was arrested several decades ago after attempting to conduct a terrorist attack on the Vatican. And because he refused to rat out his co-conspirators in exchange for immunity, he was placed under house arrest, meaning he has been confined within the walls of the Spellman house for the past 75 years, and he can't leave. I am very conflicted about Ambrose as a character. On the one hand, I think he's great. I would even go as far as to say that he's one of the better characters in this show. Chance Perdomo is just so good in this role. He gives Ambrose a sense of charisma that is just way too powerful. It's insane how naturally stylish this character is. But it's only upon rewatching the show that I realized something. Ambrose is really boring. And I don't mean that as an insult because I still like the character, but hear me out. Basically, in early seasons, Ambrose is not really a character. He's an exposition device. Sabrina goes to him with questions and his scenes are pretty much just him explaining the world and the rules of witches to Sabrina, but really, he's explaining it to the audience so they can understand what's going on. Ambrose only exists to give information. He will walk into a scene, explain things the audience needs to know to understand the rest of the episode, and then he either leaves or he hangs around in the background of other scenes where the more important characters get shit done. That's it. That's what Ambrose does in the first couple seasons. I mean, at least he makes the exposition fun because, again, Ambrose has a lot of charisma and swagger, but within the context of the story, it takes a while before Ambrose becomes a real character. Another thing that I sort of dislike about him is I hate that he acts like a teenager. It doesn't make sense. And at first it didn't bother me too much, but then once again, given the fact that he has been confined in the Spellman house for 75 years and was in his 20s when he committed his crime, we know Ambrose is at the very least 95 years old. He's actually an old man. He just looks young. So I hate that he can be so immature at times, and I hate that he keeps hooking up with underage boys and underage girls. He even develops a romantic relationship with Prudence, who is 16 or 17 years old. Stop doing that shit. It's not that hard. Stop it. But aside from that, Ambrose is fine. He's one of the more likable characters in this show, and I think it would have been a shame if he wasn't there. Not that much else to say about him, so let's just move on. Meow Meow, Salem the Cat. This one is personal on every level. Salem the Cat is an absolute staple of the Sabrina Spellman world. Some might argue that he's the best part of it, and I would agree with those people. If you don't know, Salem is Sabrina's talking cat, her companion. He's always with her, they're kind of best friends, and it's been like that since 1962 when he first appeared in the comics. When you think of Sabrina Spellman, you think of Salem the Cat. They come hand in hand. However, in this show, Roberto has made some choices with Salem that I just cannot vibe with. And the reason why I cannot vibe with these choices is simply the fact that these choices do not make sense and I don't understand them. Let's take a look at some of the changes made with Salem. In the comic book, Salem is given to Sabrina as a gift from Aunt Hilda and Aunt Zelda on her 6th birthday. In the show, Salem randomly appears to Sabrina a couple days before her 16th birthday and becomes her familiar. Why? No reason, it's just what it is. In the show, Salem is a ghoul, a goblin, a sort of spirit that shapeshifts into an animal to be a companion to a witch he chooses. But he doesn't have a backstory. We know absolutely nothing about him. In the comic, it's completely different. Salem actually used to be a human being named Samuel who was cursed and turned into a cat by the witches of Salem after he slept with one of them and got her pregnant. In the Teenage Witch show from the 90s, it's even better. We learn that Salem used to be an absolute maniac who wanted to destroy the world and enslave everyone so he could rule as an emperor. But the Council of Witches hunted him down and turned him into a cat as punishment. I love that backstory because when he talks with Sabrina, he's all sarcastic and shit, and you can tell he's still completely insane, but at the same time, he knows he's just a cat now, so he's really chill about everything.
Oh, like any young kid, I dreamed of world domination.
Wow. No wonder you're so possessive of the sofa.
It would have been glorious. Me, as the firm but just Emperor of Earth.
Salem, would you like your rubber mouse?
Please.
It really sucks that we didn't get that here, because in Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, Salem and Sabrina never really form a bond. They never really become super close like they do in other incarnations. Salem literally just shows up and he's like, hey bitch, I heard you call in the forest, so I'm here now. And then he turns into a cat and you never really learn anything about him. He just hangs around for the rest of the show. He's just there.
I heard you calling in the woods, and I came.
But despite all of those changes and all of those wild differences, the biggest crime committed against Salem in Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is the fact that he doesn't talk. I cannot tell you how much that bothers me. Everybody knows that Salem talks. That's his thing. He's the cat that never shuts up. Like, imagine if Deadpool was a cat. That's Salem. Most of the best moments in any incarnation of Sabrina is in the banter between Sabrina and Salem. I cannot stand that Salem doesn't talk in Chilling Adventures. It's so lame. And I know I'm not alone in this because people were so bothered by it that Kiernan Shipka had to clarify things in an interview with Entertainment Tonight after the release of season 1. Kiernan explained that Salem does talk, but only Sabrina can understand him. She's the only one who doesn't hear meows. And okay, but I'm sorry, if you need to have one of your actors explain the lore to the show to fans in interviews because it's just so unclear, maybe you're just doing a bad job at writing your show. And also, her statement isn't even true, because Ambrose is shown to understand Salem more than once in the show. He has full-blown conversations with him. So clearly there's a problem there because your mythos is so inconsistent that even the actors on the show are not sure how it works. Get your shit together, man. It's not that hard. It's a talking cat, dude. You literally had a werewolf in a Victorian dress in this show. You had a talking goat man, but you couldn't do a cat. And the part that I really don't understand is that if you're going to bring Salem into the show just to take away his ability to speak and strip him from his backstory as a human, why have him in the show at all? Especially because Salem doesn't do anything in this show. I'm not kidding. He's here for all 4 seasons and he doesn't do jack shit. We're told he's a spirit that can take a ghoul form and be super powerful, and that's actually pretty badass as a concept. You would think that he would become a part of the gang and turn into a ghoul to fuck people up when shit gets real, right? Well, no. Salem transforms into a ghoul twice in the entire show. Once in the pilot and another time halfway through season 1. And both times he does it off screen. We never actually see him in ghoul form, and then he never transforms again anyways. He just meows in the background during scenes. Salem is completely useless in this show, and that's Roberto's fault. You just have to ruin everything, don't you? So anyway, Salem is the best character in the entire Sabrina mythology, and they completely ruin him, and it pisses me off. Moving on. Aunt Hilda. This is probably my favorite character in the entire show. I don't know, guys. Hilda is freaking great. She's the youngest of the 2 aunts, and she's played by the wonderful Lucy Davis, who some of you will probably recognize from the first Wonder Woman movie, where she plays the exact same character.
Ooh, well, I do everything. I go where he tells me to go and I do what he tells me to do.
Yeah, well, where I'm from, that's called slavery.
I really like her.
Fantastic. Ladies, after you.
But you know what? I'm not complaining, because she's just too good at it. Hilda is a kind, shy, and caring woman with a lot of heart, and I wish she was my friend. I really like the theme that's given to her character in the first 2 seasons. Hilda is a witch who signed her name in the Devil's Book, but she has always sort of regretted it. She's never quite felt in her place as a witch, which is a really interesting take on a character like that. Think about it. Hilda is immortal. She has insane power. She can do whatever she wants. She doesn't play by the world's rules, but she's never been happy with that. Where Zelda absolutely adores her status of goddess and really enjoys being an immortal witch, Hilda is more drawn to the common pleasures of life. She finds joy in the little things. She's a witch who relates more to mortals than she does her own people. And in the earlier episodes of the show, there's a lot of internal conflict in her. She doesn't really know how she feels about forcing Sabrina to sign her own name in the Devil's Book. But Zelda bullies her into doing it anyway, which actually circles back to another interesting theme with the character. You see, Hilda is a person who was never really given a chance to make her own choices. She's always been told what to do, either by her parents or by her siblings. A lot of her personality traits are a direct result of having been bossed around her entire life and being underestimated by everyone at every turn. She just never felt like she was a part of that world, and throughout the events of the show, we see Hilda distancing herself from it more and more. That's a pretty interesting idea. How do you deal with being dissatisfied with having all the power in the world? Some people are just not interested in power, so having all of it does not make them feel fulfilled, and Hilda definitely falls into that category. But despite all of that, that's not to say we don't get some surprises with this character. I know that described like this, she can sound a little boring, but we find out that Hilda is actually a really powerful witch. But she doesn't like to hurt people, so we never really see her unleash her full power. She might actually be more powerful than Zelda, but she always kinda keeps it at bay, because she's not interested in having or using that much power, unless it's necessary. Because yeah, she does have those moments where she just bodies people in seconds when she's put in a situation where she doesn't have a choice, or in one specific scene where she decides to get revenge for the death of her boyfriend, and it's pretty great. Unfortunately though, Hilda kinda gets caught up in the stupidity of the show, and her storylines take a bit of a hit. She goes from being the moral compass of the story to being a background character that is usually irrelevant until the finale when she's needed to do some magic stuff. I truly think that if the writers had been better, Hilda would have been the best character in the show, hands down. But Lucy Davis is way too good in the role, and I still love Hilda, don't sue me. Alright, next, Aunt Zelda. Aunt Zelda is a really fun character for like 3 episodes, and then she's not anymore. Yeah, I'm sorry guys, I very quickly got tired of her shtick. It's like the writers never really figured her character out beyond her quirky personality, so Aunt Zelda survives entirely on Miranda Otto's impeccable performance. But that's just not enough. And I don't mean to be rude here, because Miranda Otto is insanely good in this role, I'm not kidding. There isn't a single scene featuring Zelda where she's not bringing it 100%. The problem is that after a while you realize that Zelda doesn't really have a point. She's just here to be snobby and mean to people for no reason, and it's just boring after a while. As a presence in the show, she works, but as a character, she's incredibly inconsistent. She contradicts herself quite a lot. On the one hand, I like her being the ruthless guardian of Sabrina, and it's often alluded to that she sees Sabrina more like a daughter than her niece. I like that Sabrina being revealed as the devil's daughter kind of messes with everything she believes in. Zelda is very devoted to her faith in the Church of Night, but she is forced to challenge that faith because she can't allow herself to see Sabrina hurt by those traditions. All of that is really interesting for her character, but the show only ever addresses it in very superficial ways, because the writers are more interested in Zelda being the weirdo with the cigarette stick who bosses everyone around, so the moments where her character gets to have more depth are very few and far between. And I also became very annoyed by her satanic puns. This is a nitpick, and I mean, almost every character does it in this show, but Zelda gets it the worst. And I get that the show is mocking Christianity with the satanic church and all. It's essentially Roberto attempting to do satire, but it's still a joke that gets old very quickly, and it gets incredibly irritating to build on an entire character around this one joke. Saying thank Satan instead of thank God is funny once or twice. Saying unholy shit instead of holy shit will make me blow air out of my nose the first time. But when you try to force these things in the dialogue all the time, always, several times an episode, don't blame me when I start rolling my eyes at it. And look, it really looks like Miranda Otto is having a lot of fun in this role, but as a character, Zelda is just way too overdone, and it bothers me. And actually, for now, this is all I'm going to say about Zelda. There is more to say, but I'm going to talk about her more later. There are a lot of people who really like Zelda because she's just such a badass or whatnot, and I disagree with that firmly, so we'll get back to Zelda. For now, let's talk about Miss Wardwell, aka Madam Satan, aka Lilith, aka the mother of anyways, Lilith. Okay, this is probably the moment some of you are going to start hating me. I don't like this character at all. And believe me, it pains me to say that, because Michelle Gomez, who plays Miss Wardwell, is one hell of a good actress, and I love her. And her performance in the show is actually really good and really fun. It's not her fault that the character sucks, it's the writers. Miss Wardwell, especially in the first 2 seasons, is written in a way that is just so brainless and incoherent that I just struggled to find any redeeming qualities about her. Even her dialogue is just painful to listen to. They intentionally make her sound like a villain right out of the 1940s, which I like, that's a fun idea, but also they keep giving her lines that make her speak like a Gen Z, like she refers to women as bad bitches and stuff like that. It's really weird. But as a character, there actually isn't all that much to say about Lilith, which is weird because she is a huge part of this show. Finding out that her only goal was to serve Lucifer because she's obsessed with him and she wants to be his queen is a little dull, and the show show isn't even consistent with her motivations. It feels like her desires change every other episode, and that weirds me out. At first, we learn that everything she does is for the approval of Lucifer because she wants to be his favorite. But then it flip-flops, and suddenly she doesn't give two shits about Lucifer, and now she just wants power. And then she wants to kill Sabrina, and then she wants Lucifer to love her again, and then she wants more power. They try to do that thing where a character is really mysterious with its motivations, and you can never really tell which side they're on, but it's very poorly executed here. I'm sorry, I hate saying it, I genuinely do, but Lilith doesn't work as a villain, and she doesn't work as an anti-hero either. Eventually, her snooping around becomes unintentionally funny because it's just that ridiculous. Like, we'll get a scene where some characters are talking, and then you just get this shot of her being in some corner of the room eavesdropping, but they do it so often that it almost becomes a parody.
International Super Spy.
We're here for you, Sabrina. We will always be here for you.
Thank you, guys. Super Spy!
Like, the show accidentally makes fun of what they're trying to do. I've got tired of seeing her talk to her bird and talk to herself as she spies on people.
And the child takes another step.
Who are you talking to? There's nobody there. But don't get me wrong, while Lilith is fun to watch because Michelle Gomez is clearly having fun being as ridiculous as humanly possible in this show, the real problem is just that it's hard to stay invested in what she's trying to accomplish within the story. And the reason why is because the mythology of the show is always shifting around out of nowhere, so her motivations have to shift around with it, and as a result, she's all over the place and she doesn't make any sense. Which brings me to the most infuriating character in this entire show. I don't even want to talk about him. Do I have to, guys? Do I have to talk about him? Fine, we'll talk about him. Lucifer Morningstar, aka the motherfucking devil Satan. This one kinda hurts my feelings. The arrival of Lucifer was the part of the show I was looking forward to the most, and I know that I'm not the only one. The entire danger of the story is about him. Obviously, he's the part of the show you're looking forward to the most. The build-up to him was insanely effective. In the first 2 seasons, you rarely see him. Everybody talks about him, but it's really rare that you actually get to have him in a scene. He's in this beast form that is somewhere between a man and a goat, and he's kinda scary, but he never really does anything, which is cool. It makes him very menacing. He just kinda lurks around in the shadows and he watches over the events of the story. The show makes it very clear that Satan has been planning something for a very long time, and it has something to do with Sabrina, but we don't know what it is yet. You get the sense that everything that is happening in the show is part of his plan, like he designed all of this, and it's hinted that when his plan is complete, he will return. I liked this. I really enjoy the mystery that was being built around Lucifer. There were little seeds planted there that had a lot of potential. It's alluded to that Sabrina's father, Edward Spellman, kind of defied Lucifer head on at some point, and so the death of Sabrina's parents was maybe not as accidental as first described. We don't know what, we don't know where, we don't know when, but something happened. Something took place between the devil and the Spellman family. And in episode 2, the very moment Sabrina is about to sign her name in the Book of the Beast, she has a vision of her dead parents telling her to run. And it's genuinely intriguing. Why? What is this big secret conspiracy that seems to tie Sabrina to Lucifer himself? There was so much intrigue here, and I could not wait to finally see Lucifer arrive in the show for real. And eventually, he does. At the end of season 2, Satan returns in his true form as Lucifer Morningstar, the fallen angel, the god of demons, the Dark Lord. And then he immediately becomes the most boring character in the entire show. I'm not kidding. This guy might be the most underwhelming portrayal of the devil I've ever seen. Nothing about him is threatening or scary. He has the most boring goals and the most boring storylines. The actor does a good enough job in the role, I guess, but I feel like they focused more on casting a pretty face rather than someone who can actually carry the sheer menace of the devil. devil. And the worst part of it is, all of that mystery around him, or the strange connection he seems to have with the Spellmans, never explained. We never get back to that. Lucifer returns, and then the show just does a bunch of dumb shit for 2 more seasons, and then it ends. We never find out what was the deal with Sabrina's parents, we never find out why they ran away, we never find out why Sabrina had that vision, and we never even find out what happened to them or how they really died. None of it is ever brought up again, none of it matters. It sucks because they built up to the devil so well. They introduced some really neat concepts with Satan. The idea of the Book of the Beast is really dope. Like this concept that every witch and warlock has to sign their names in it and pledge allegiance to him and vow to do whatever he asked was really effective and scary. There's this episode in season 2 where Sabrina learns that sometimes Satan will just appear to somebody and ask them to do really random stuff just to test their loyalty and fuck with them. And if they refuse to do what he asks, bad shit will start to happen to them and their loved ones. We learned that a couple hundred years ago, he randomly appeared to Aunt Hilda and gave her a box with a button, and he asked her to press the button but never told her what would happen if she did. So Hilda pressed it and was in an absolute state of anxiety for months, waiting for something horrible to happen as a result, but nothing ever came. So she smashed the box to see what was inside or if it had a spell on it, and it was empty. It was just a regular ass box with a button on it that did nothing. Satan just asked her to press it to see if she would do it. I love that idea. It's such a terrifying concept, and it sold Satan really well as this unpredictable entity who will just do anything because he feels like it. Kinda like the Joker. He will just appear to you and torment you to ensure that you are still loyal to him. It's so dope as a way to portray the devil. Similarly, in the first scene of episode 2, Father Blackwood explains that good and evil are concepts that are way beyond the mentality of the devil, and that he operates only on the concept of free will. I thought that was very interesting because we tend to see the devil as irredeemable evil, but that's probably not how he sees himself. And since they hinted at the arrival of the devil in the future, I was really excited to see them put that ideology to work. I was really intrigued to see how he functions in this world if he doesn't see anyone or anything as good or evil. But then Lucifer arrives, and no, he's just a normal, generic, evil villain with not much of a philosophy to drive him. He's just evil movie bad guy. When he comes back in his final form at the end of season 2, all of that cleverness behind his power is just gone. Satan reveals himself to be kinda whiny and lame. He's really uninteresting, and he's not as big a part of the story moving forward as you'd expect. He's just kinda there, he pops in and out whenever, and he quickly became my least favorite character on the show. Also, he's surprisingly not as powerful as the show makes him out to be before his arrival. During the first 2 seasons, they quite literally build him up as being the most powerful being under God himself. But then he gets bodied by pretty much everyone at some point in the show. Everybody is able to best him pretty easily. I'm sorry, but the fact that 3 16-year-old mortals managed to block the opening of hell temporarily on their own shows that Satan is probably not as godlike as he thinks he is. He gets defeated constantly. Like seriously, he comes back in his original most powerful form. The form that God gave him with all of the power that was awarded to him. It's finally there, the moment we've been waiting for since the beginning of the show, and he immediately loses to a bunch of kids and 2 regular witches. This show's version of Lucifer is just such a disappointment. That's probably why I stopped watching the show early in season 3 the first time I watched it. I just got bored because he was everything I looked forward to in the show, and he turned out to be by far the most boring part of the entire thing. Ugh, what a shame. Are you proud of yourself? You're the only person on this fucking planet who can make the devil boring. Wake up! Anyways, the show has an army of other characters. I think there are way too many, and the existence of some of them in the story is never truly justified. I feel bad for Harvey Kinkle. It's not his fault that he's nobody's favorite character. The writers never gave him a chance. Upon rewatching, I realized that Ross Lynch actually does a pretty good job at playing the boring, ordinary dude, because unlike other characters characters in the show, Harvey is supposed to be boring. That's the point. I mean, it doesn't excuse the fact that he has awful characterization throughout the entire show, but it has to be worth something. He becomes a bit of a whiny background character after a while, but he's not the worst thing ever. He's tolerable. He's fine. Roz, on the other hand, is just so uninteresting to me. I like the idea of her powers. All of it is really intriguing on paper, but it's so terribly executed. Her character just never manages to become interesting, and she never matters in the story anyway. Also, I try not to take many shots at bad performances. I just don't like doing that, but sometimes I just have to point it out. Jazz St. Clair is not great in this role. I'm gonna leave it at that. She does improve in future seasons, but season 1 especially is really rough for her. It gets a little awkward to watch her scenes sometimes. It's not entirely her fault because the writing of her character is just awful, especially when it comes to her dialogue. But in short, I don't care for Roz, I don't care for her relationship with Harvey, and frankly, if you take her out of the show completely, it doesn't really change. Same for Theo, but Theo is cool. I like him. Just like the other two, he can be a little boring and he doesn't contribute that much to the overall story, but like he's a nice presence to have around. There just isn't that much to say about him. He's there and I'm perfectly fine with that. One interesting thing to bring up about him is that his transition storyline is actually much better than I would have expected from Roberto Feminism, and I later found out that it's because Lachlan Watson, who plays Theo, asked for the storyline to be given more time. Roberto's initial and very shitty plan was to have Susie transition to Theo in the first couple episodes of the show out of nowhere, with no explanation or build-up. And I just, Jesus man, at some point it's like you're just trying to make your shows bad. I mean, come on, it would have been the most shamelessly exploitative storyline just for the sake of gaining progressive points in the eyes of the public, but that didn't sit right with Lachlan, which I completely agree with. So they argued with Roberto and the producers, and they eventually agreed to let that storyline be given the time it deserves to breathe and work properly. And so Theo's transition storyline is heavily hinted at in season 1, but truly begins and develops in season 2. I wouldn't say it's the greatest storyline of all time, but as far as Roberto's signature incompetent storytelling goes, it's well done. I gotta give credit where credit is due. And I'm glad Lachlan stood up for representation to be handled with more brains, because God knows Roberto doesn't have that capacity on his own. Nick Scratch fucking sucks. Yeah, I don't have a transition. I don't care. I know this is going to offend all of the people who think he's really hot and ship him with Sabrina and whatever, but he's not a good character. I'm sorry. He's played by a charismatic actor and all, but again, Nick is Sabrina's love interest, so his only personality is being obsessed with Sabrina. That's it. Seriously, the end of his story is literally him killing himself to join Sabrina in the afterlife. He has one really good scene where he realizes sacrificing himself for Sabrina by going to hell and imprisoning Lucifer inside of him was a mistake and he leaves Sabrina. Like, the scene where they break up is actually good and Gavin Leatherwood gets to show a bit more of his acting ability, but that's about it. Nick only exists in this show for ship culture and I could not care less about him. I am excited to see Gavin Leatherwood in other projects though, because he is really good. The Weird Sisters could have been great, but they end up falling flat for me. Prudence is okay, because she gets to do more than just hang around and speak in unison with the other two, but she's also extremely one note. Being mean to everyone for no reason is not a good character trait if you're not willing to give said character the emotional depth that should come with it. And also, I will say, making a choice to have a prominent black character in your show only to make a racism allegory her primary personality trait was not your greatest idea, Roberto. Prudence does end up being more as a character, but she never evolves into something great because Roberto doesn't really understand the idea of character development. In his shows, everyone is just the same all the time. It doesn't matter what happens to them, they never grow or change or evolve. And the other two sisters, Agatha and Dorcas, they're just background characters, they're completely useless. If you're lucky, they'll do something interesting in one episode during the season, but the rest of the time they're just here to be here. Father Blackwood is another another character that is quite literally the definition of wasted potential. The possibilities with his character were endless. He could have been an absolute legend. The introduction of Father Blackwood in the final scene of the pilot was incredibly badass. But then he turns out to be a bit of a bumbling idiot, just like Lucifer. Anyone can defeat him with little to no effort. At first, people talk like being the high priest is a really fucking big deal, but then it's just not. He doesn't have that much authority, all things considered. He's not all that powerful as well. Everybody keeps breaking his rules. I don't know, I really don't like Faustus Blackwood. He's probably the weakest character in this show, and he's definitely a huge factor in the show crossing the line between ridiculous and stupid. He represents everything that's wrong with Chilling Adventures. But overall, the performances are good. Aside from a couple here and there, like I said earlier, everybody does a pretty great job. I mean, sometimes the line delivery is a little awkward.
Admit the truth right now. Did you cause the mind collapse that killed Tommy Kinkle?
Wow, how convincing, Sabrina. But I'll mostly attribute that to terrible dialogue more so than weak performances, and that's on Roberto. This man could not write decent dialogue to save his own life. He can't do it. He's the perfect representation of the middle-aged man who thinks he knows and understands how teenagers talk, so he attempts to use modern lingo in his dialogue, but he doesn't really understand when that use is warranted or not. So what we end up with is a bunch of characters who talk like 14-year-olds tweet.
Sabrina Spellman. We're endgame.
Man, shut your bitch ass up.
And the awfulness of the dialogue is often enhanced by another problem on the show that never fails to make me laugh out loud. And that problem is... the editors of Chilling Adventures of Sabrina are on crack. I'm serious, you really need to know I'm not kidding here. Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is one of the shows with the worst editing I've ever seen. There's this saying in Hollywood that says the best editor is the one you don't notice. And that's true to some degree, and this is a show where I notice them a lot. Mostly because I keep trying to understand what the hell they're trying to do. According to Wikipedia, the show was edited by this people, so hey guys, if you ever see this, please stop getting high before editing the show, thank you. You see, it seems like those editors are not too sure how to build tension in a scene. So, they do it by throwing booming sound effects after every fucking line a character speaks, because they think that makes it more tense. And they do it so much. It's so distracting. Sometimes they just do it in the middle of a conversation for no reason. Like nothing is happening, but they will just throw sound effects at you out of nowhere.
Him and that stupid lizard of his. Took it everywhere.
Like, why? Nothing happened. They're just talking. And they do that all the time. At some point I started wondering if this wasn't just some kind of inside joke between them, because it's insane. Imagine I'm just talking to you and in the middle of my sentence you're just hearing a bunch of explosions and crashes for no reason, as if there's a war happening right next to me. But that's honestly the least of my problems with this show. It's just one that makes me laugh personally. I've already talked about a few of my issues, but arguably my biggest problem with Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is that this show is very, very condescending. And I can't stand it. It is one of the most patronizing woke shows ever, and it really grinds my gears. When I said I was making this video, I got so many messages from you guys asking me to talk about the awful representation of feminism that is in this show, so I know I'm not alone in this. I've already talked about bad wokeness in media, mainly in my Supergirl video, where I addressed how much I dislike shows that talk down to the audience and treats them like morons, all while being hypocritical with its messages and values. And Chilling Adventures of Sabrina definitely falls in that category. I also talked about great wokeness in media, mainly in my sex education video, but none of that applies in the show. The big problem here is that Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa really prides himself on writing shows that are feminist and showcase strong female characters. And that's great. If you ask me, I think shows need more of that. However, here, it doesn't work, because I don't think Roberto understands what feminism is. His vision of female female empowerment is really backwards. Because when you look at Chilling Adventures of Sabrina and Riverdale, you quickly realize that Roberto seems to think that feminism and hating men are the same thing. And that's where we got a problem. Because his definition of a strong female character isn't a character with specific values or a sense of self-worth that transcends society expectations, or a desire for equality in certain aspects of the show. No. That would be good writing. No, Roberto's idea of a strong woman is a woman who walks around and just endlessly complains about how much she hates men because of reasons. And that's the only thing she can talk about. He makes them use big words like misogyny or toxic masculinity or the patriarchy, which yes, are terms that are used by feminists and people in general, but those words usually come with a very specific thought process and ideology, but that ideology is nowhere to be seen in Roberto's shows. The characters only use those words because they sound woke, but it never comes with anything of substance. These characters never actually do or say anything that could portray an important message related to those topics. His strong female characters are never given storylines that would showcase that strength and elevate a character. Why? Because Roberto doesn't put any effort into writing female characters as human beings. He thinks they're strong because the only thing they ever talk about is how much they hate men. And throughout this show, it gets so intense that it becomes almost insulting to the audience's intelligence. It almost seems like he is mocking feminism instead of supporting it.
Puritanical masculinity? Principal Hawthorne is the most intolerant, the most buffoonish, the most misogynist of all. When will the world learn?
You mean like a club to topple the white patriarchy?
Wait, what? I'll bend it to my will. Or break her.
It's always brute force with you men, isn't it?
The thought of you, of any of us having both terrifies him.
Why is that?
He's a man, isn't he?
I'll need clean towels, fresh water, and prudence.
Prudence?
Yes, I'll need help. And this is no place for a man. And that very much includes you.
The girl is my charge.
I can't risk leaving her fate in lesser hands.
And similarly, Roberto seems to think that humiliating men in the most degrading fashion is what it is to be a feminist. Which is ironic because there is a word for that, but that word is not feminism. I don't think anybody needs me to tell them what that word is. Roberto also goes above and beyond to portray every male character in his shows as heartless, brainless assholes who only talk about boobs and have for only passion in life to degrade women, and overall, he only ever allows them to be as one-dimensional as possible and make them as hateful as possible so that he can then have his strong female characters talk at length about how awful men are as a gender. And usually, if a male character is not an abominable, sexist bully with predatory behaviors, it's because he is a love interest to one of his main characters, in which case their only personality trait is to be absolutely obsessed with their assigned characters and they don't really have a life or a personality outside of them. But additionally, Roberto portrays women in a very strange way as well, and in one that feels a little hypocritical if you ask me. I said I was going to talk more about Zelda earlier, so let's take her as an example. Roberto seems to see on Zelda as this feminist icon, the embodiment of a strong, confident woman, and he intends for people to look up to her because she's just such a badass. And that would be great, except for the fact that Zelda is a horrible person. She's unbelievably mean, she spends the whole show talking down to people, she bullies her own sister, constantly gaslighting her, degrading her, and making her feel like an incompetent idiot every occasion she gets. Hilda severely lacks any sense of self-confidence because Zelda is constantly putting her down. She makes her feel ugly, stupid, useless, and lesser than. She will also just kill Hilda when she feels like it, knowing full well that if she keeps on doing that, there will eventually come a point where Hilda cannot come back to life. We even come to find out that this constant bullying has been going on since they were kids, and we know they're now well over 500 years old at the very least. Zelda is just incapable of showing any kind of support towards her sister, and she uses Hilda as her own personal punching bag. When Hilda expresses a desire to get a regular job at a coffee shop, Zelda just responds by telling her how stupid she is because, oh yeah, Zelda is also a classist and she sees the idea of a 9-to-5 as beneath her. Hilda wants help to choose an outfit for a date. Zelda just mocks her and essentially tells her that being pretty is not an option for her. And that's only scratching the surface. Zelda also helped offer Sabrina's soul to the devil without her consent, and then spent her whole life gaslighting her and convincing her to do it herself when she turned 16 so that nobody would ever find out what she did. She also befriends and pretends to care for a pregnant lady all while sleeping with her husband. She's always patronizing Sabrina and responding to her worries in the most condescending ways, and we see her several times reminding Ambrose that he is nothing more than a disgrace and a burden to her because she doesn't like being his guardian. My point here is that Zelda is quite an abusive person. She's insanely harmful, manipulative, and cruel. In a few words, Zelda has all of the traits that Roberto would portray as villainous and toxic in male characters. But because Zelda is a woman, now those exact same traits are portrayed as feminist, powerful, confident, and even progressive. Zelda is a bad bitch. She is someone to look up to. And I'm sorry, that doesn't make sense in my head. Either those traits are good, or those traits are bad. But you cannot tell me the answer changes based on which gender is exhibiting those behaviors. That's just hypocrisy. But that is exactly what Roberto does. And that's not an isolated case. A lot of people pointed out that Veronica from Riverdale is the same, and it's a recurrent theme in every single one of Roberto's projects.
Who would do such a thing?
Men.
Excuse the shit out of me? Ma'am, excuse me, ma'am. The first thing we see you do in this show is murder an innocent woman in cold blood to steal her identity. You had an innocent man possessed by a demon and then murdered him while making sure that he suffers for your own entertainment. You repeatedly encouraged young witches to use their powers to prey on the weak and traumatize them. You hooked up with an underage boy and then murdered him. You killed a teenage pizza guy and you ate him, and then you actually used feminism as a way to manipulate Sabrina into enslaving herself to the devil, who is a man, by making her believe that that is what a strong woman who is not afraid of power would do. So don't give me that shit. You don't get a free pass because of your gender. You are easily the most awful person in this entire show. And the devil is in this show. The lack of self-awareness in this story and the hypocrisy when it comes to its values is just crazy to me. Roberto wants to portray women as strong and independent, but he also writes a number of scenes where women are literally kneeling at men's feet in submission as they beg for their approval. Yo, Berto, do you need a Kit Kat, my guy? Similarly, in the first episode of season 2, Sabrina wants to enter the competition to be crowned top boy at her witch academy. Now, the whole point is that the title of top boy is usually given to, well, a boy. But Sabrina wants to be top boy to prove that women would be just as capable and worthy of that title. Now, the thing to note here is that she doesn't demand to be top boy. She just asks for an equal opportunity to run for the title. I like that. That's really cool. That can be a really solid storyline with a really solid message. But then, once she enters the competition, when she is given her fair equal shot, Sabrina cheats to win. She teams up with the Weird Sisters and they use telepathy to give Sabrina answers she doesn't have. But the show still treats it like Sabrina is pulling this absolute girl power move as some form of feminist symbol. So what's the message here? What are you trying to say? And later in that same episode, Sabrina goes to her mortal high school to see Susie try out for the basketball team because her high school has a boys-only basketball team, but Susie, who at the time was not out as transgender, asks for an opportunity to try out anyways. And when she is granted that opportunity after some struggle, Sabrina shows up and uses dark magic to enhance Susie's abilities when she sees that she's not doing well. So Susie got her fair equal shot, but she cheated to get in. What is the message here? This is like a repeated theme in this episode. This isn't an accident. Like, it's the point. It's so weird. This show is just the worst possible representation for feminism. Roberto makes women seem so toxic and shady, but he really believes he's elevating them, and I don't think it's fair. I genuinely think this is more harmful to the message of female empowerment than anything else. And if I'm wrong, please let me know in those comments down below, because I would actually really like to know your opinion. But to me, Roberto's logic is just so backwards. The show was also criticized for having a lot of problems with queerbaiting, fat shaming, and slut shaming. It pushes a lot of very strange ideals that just rub me the wrong way. Men are worthless regardless of their identity. People with kinks are weirdos. Pregnant women are delusional and not to be listened to. Because you see, Roberto is a master when it comes to this phenomenon I like to call HPA, Hollywood performative activism. It's a larger and more recent problem in Hollywood that needs to be talked about more, but Roberto really is a perfect example of how much of a problem this is now. And he doesn't only do it with feminism, he also does it when it comes to race-related issues and at times with the LGBTQ+ community. He really wants the praise for making his shows progressive, but nothing in his shows are all that progressive if you really take a look at it. They appear progressive on the surface, but it's all very surface level. But again, we'll talk about that more when we get to Riverdale. Am I forgetting anything? Oh yeah, the finale! The series finale of Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is incredibly anticlimactic and illogical and kinda boring. I mean, it wasn't entirely their fault because it wasn't their intended ending, they just got cancelled. But it's still a testament to how broken, frustrating, and messy the show had become by season 4. The entire lore around the story completely stopped making sense. Things just come in and out of nowhere. Nothing means anything anymore. None of the characters make sense anymore. The show constantly attempts to one-up itself and tries to make itself crazier than the previous episode, and things just keep escalating and escalating for no reason, and it's just way too chaotic. So at the end, there are now 2 Sabrinas because of some time travel fuckery that comes out of nowhere and makes no sense. The show attempts to create a time loop that is just full of holes and paradoxes, and it doesn't work. It's just Roberto trying to be clever, but he already has 3 shows that perfectly demonstrate that cleverness is not his thing. Anyways, there are 2 Sabrinas existing at the same time now. Sabrina Spellman, the one from a post-apocalyptic future, and Sabrina Morningstar, the one from the present and the Queen of Hell. Long story short, one of them dies and then the spirit of the other is transferred into the body of the first, but then she dies again, and at the end both Sabrinas are dead and none of the problems that have been introduced in the show since season 1 are ever truly resolved. And by the end there are still a lot of questions in the air, either because the show didn't get to it yet or because the writers just dropped that part of the plot for no reason. And I'm not kidding, the show goes to what I like to call the Pretty Little Liars Academy of abandoning storylines. I'm kidding, I'm not really calling it that. We can break it down actually. Here's the list of major plot points in Chilling Adventures of Sabrina that were never explained. Who was the Trinket Man? Where did he come from? What happened to Judith and Judas? Why did Hilda help Sabrina's mom baptize Sabrina in a Christian church in secret? What actually happened to Sabrina's parents? Everyone keeps hinting at the fact that their accident was not an accident, which, okay, but how did they die then? And if they were killed, why? And by who? Why didn't Ambrose and Aunt Zelda just put Sabrina in the cane pit to resurrect her at the end? What's the deal with the telescope? Did Nick commit suicide at the end? How did he get there? And if this is the afterlife, why is Sabrina alone? And where did the other Sabrina go? What happened to baby Adam? What was the deal with Ambrose and the Vatican? Who was his mentor? And who were his accomplices? And what happened to Endless Salem? Did he just disappear? There are way more of those, and I'm not gonna go through all of them. We will never have the answers to these questions, because the season 4 finale was mostly nonsense that attempted to set up a very underwhelming cliffhanger, but it turns out to be the end of the story, so yeah. I'm not too mad because, like I said, I initially quit on the show a couple episodes into season 3. I eventually came back and finished it for this video, but I wasn't too invested. The real victims here are the actual fans who really stuck with the show and were constantly rewarded with absolute mediocrity, all for it to end abruptly with little to no resolution. It really seems like the writers had no idea where they were going with the story, and they kept just pulling random things out of their asses to keep going. But I'm okay, I didn't really really care by that point. I realized through season 4 that I really did not enjoy any of the characters anymore. They all seem to have lost their essence. Even Ambrose, he's not the cool, stylish, smooth motherfucker with the swagger from season 1. He's just really lame now. He's a shadow of his former self. Everyone really sucks now, and I just wasn't invested in their storylines anymore. Oh, Father Blackwood is still hanging around causing mischief? Okay, sure. Oh, he's blind now. Okay. Oh no, look guys, Lucifer is whining again, and he's mad about things. He's still not doing anything, but he's mad. Oh look, Lilith is trying to take back the throne of hell for the 7th time. Chilling Adventures of Sabrina became so bland and empty and weirdly repetitive. It honestly was more difficult to get through season 4 than I thought it would be. It's just really stupid, and I was mentally checked out for most of it. I don't think I'm the only one here, and I'm curious to know how fans felt about the ending, because from what I've heard, people were not too happy. But in the end, I actually feel bad for the cast when it comes to the show being cancelled. They actually seemed like they enjoyed working on this show, you know? Not like another cast I can think of. Kiernan Shipka in particular really seemed to be passionate about the show, and I think she absolutely loved playing Sabrina Spellman. It sucks, but you know, it is what it is. Chilling Adventures had so much potential. The idea behind it was so good, and it genuinely could have been one of the greatest shows on television, but unfortunately, quality is not at the top of Roberto's list. So instead, we got this weird chimera of a show that was doomed to fail. The part that I don't understand is that everyone was really excited at the idea of a true horror show with adult themes starring Sabrina Spellman, and Netflix knew it. That's why they made the initial teaser so incredibly creepy and shit. So why not just do that? You could have had your next Stranger Things here, but you just had to give it to the guy who made Riverdale. Great, congratulations. Here's a Kit Kat, you probably need it. Chilling Adventures might be campy, but there is such a thing as bad camp, and if someone asks you what bad camp is, well now you have the perfect example. Also, before you ask, no, I'm never talking about Katie Keene, and yes, it's still better than Emily in Paris.
Maybe I'm bitter. Do they know better? They like me now way more than ever. Fickle IG, they think they're clever. Flexing like they're Kylie Jenner. Red lightsaber, slash that shit like I'm Darth Vader. Get on my ship like Luke Skywalker. Double decker. I think I'm done. Miss me when I'm gone. Barry on when I run. Han Solo with my gun. I think I'm done. Miss me when I'm gone. Barry on when I run. Han Solo with my gun.